Have you ever noticed that people talk about intuition all the time, but rarely explain what they actually mean? Some people call it a gift. Some call it a spiritual ability. Some say it's a message from the universe. Others believe it's just psychology. And honestly, after thinking about this topic for a long time, I don't think the most interesting question is, what is intuition? I think a more interesting question is, why do some people seem to hear it clearly, while others feel completely disconnected from it? I've been reading, observing, listening to people, and paying attention to my own experiences for years. And one thing I've noticed is that there are a lot of myths surrounding intuition. In fact, many of the most popular ideas about intuition are probably the least useful. For example, one of the most common things you'll hear is, intuition is the voice of the universe. Maybe, maybe not. The problem is that nobody explains what you're actually supposed to do with that information. How do you hear it? How do you recognize it? How do you know it's not fear, wishful thinking, anxiety, or simply a random thought? Another popular belief is, just trust your intuition. But what if you can't hear it? What if you've spent years second guessing yourself? What if every decision feels confusing? For many people, that advice isn't helpful. It's like telling someone to follow a map when they can't even see the map. I've also noticed that many people believe intuition should arrive as some dramatic inner voice, almost like a movie scene, a sudden revelation, a magical message. But for many people, intuition doesn't work like that at all. Some people experience it through feelings, some through body sensations, some through sudden clarity, and some through a quiet knowing that appears before they can explain why. Personally, I don't usually experience intuition as a voice. For me, it's often a feeling. Sometimes it's a heaviness in my chest. Not anxiety, not panic, just a sense that something doesn't fit. Other times it's the opposite, a feeling of relief, a feeling that something is aligned, as if my entire body relaxes before my mind catches up. Of course, that's just my experience. Yours may be completely different. And I think that's important to remember. People often talk about intuition as if everyone experiences it the same way, but we're all different. And because of that, intuition may show up differently for each person. Now, here's something interesting. Science doesn't really support the idea of a mystical intuition that predicts the future. But science has discovered something that I think is just as fascinating. Our brains are constantly collecting information without our conscious awareness. Thousands of tiny details, facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, patterns, small changes in behavior. And often our brains process those signals before our conscious minds do. That's why someone might suddenly think something feels off. Without being able to explain why, researchers sometimes describe intuition as rapid unconscious pattern recognition. In other words, your brain notices something before you consciously notice it. And I find that fascinating because it means intuition isn't necessarily irrational. Sometimes it's intelligence working beneath the surface. In fact, experienced firefighters, doctors, pilots, chess players, and business owners often make decisions that appear intuitive. But what they're really doing is recognizing patterns built through years of experience. Their minds see something familiar before their conscious thoughts can explain it. Now, does that explain every intuitive experience people have? Probably not. There are still plenty of things we don't fully understand, but I do think it gives us a useful perspective. And it also leads to another question. If intuition exists in some form, why do so many people struggle to hear it? This is where I think things become really interesting, because maybe the problem isn't that people don't have intuition. Maybe the problem is that they can't hear it. Think about the average day: notifications, videos, messages, news, social media, music, podcasts, endless information. We're constantly consuming something. And when we're constantly consuming, it's difficult to notice what's happening inside us. I've noticed this in my own life. Whenever I feel overwhelmed, exhausted, or mentally overloaded, I become less connected to my own instincts. Everything becomes noisy. Everything becomes confusing. But when life slows down even a little, I start noticing things more clearly. Not because I'm becoming more spiritual, but because there is finally enough silence to hear myself think. Another misconception about intuition is that it should always be trusted. I don't actually agree with that. I think intuition can be incredibly useful, but I also think human beings are complicated. Fear can feel convincing, trauma can feel convincing, anxiety can feel convincing, and sometimes people mistake those things for intuition. One pattern I've personally noticed is this: fear often feels urgent. It wants an answer immediately. It says, decide now, act now, worry now. Intuition often feels calmer, not always comfortable, but calmer, almost like a quiet observation. It doesn't usually scream, it simply appears and then waits. Another thing I've noticed is that fear tends to repeat itself over and over. Intuition often speaks once, then the mind takes over and starts arguing. Maybe you've experienced that too. Now let's talk about something practical, because I think most people aren't looking for another theory about intuition. They're looking for a way to explore it themselves. So if someone told me they couldn't hear their intuition at all, these are the 5 practices I would suggest trying for the next 30 days. The first practice is surprisingly simple. Before searching for someone else's opinion, ask for your own. If you're choosing a movie, a restaurant, a book, a project, or even a direction in life, pause for a moment before reaching for your phone. Ask yourself, what do I actually think? Not what the internet thinks, not what everyone else thinks. What do I think? It sounds small, but this habit gradually strengthens self trust. The second practice involves the body. Choose a question. Maybe it's, should I continue this project? Or, is this opportunity right for me? Imagine the answer is yes. Sit quietly for a minute, notice your body, then imagine the answer is no. Notice your body again. Don't force an answer. Just observe. Sometimes the body reveals things the mind is still debating. The third practice is keeping what I call an intuition journal. Whenever you have a strong feeling about something, write it down. A first impression, a sudden idea, a feeling about a situation. Then leave it alone. At the end of 30 days, look back. You may discover patterns you never noticed before. The fourth practice is 10 minutes of silence every day. No phone, no music, no podcast, no task. Just 10 quiet minutes. Most people haven't experienced true silence in a very long time, and sometimes clarity needs silence to emerge. The fifth practice is paying attention to your first reaction. Not your analysis, not your explanation, your first reaction. When meeting someone, reading a message, receiving an offer. Notice what appears before your thoughts start building a story around it. You don't have to obey that reaction, just notice it. That alone can teach you a lot. And here's a simple experiment you can try this week. For 7 days, pay attention to every moment when you say, I knew it. Most of us have had those moments. A feeling about a person, a decision, a situation, something that later made sense. Instead of focusing on whether you were right or wrong, ask yourself, how did that feeling arrive? Was it a thought, a body sensation, a feeling in your chest, a sense of calm, a sudden knowing? The goal isn't to prove anything. The goal is simply to become familiar with your own internal language, because intuition may not speak the same way for everyone. And maybe that's why so many people struggle to recognize it. At the end of the day, I don't think intuition is a superpower, and I don't think it's something reserved for a special group of people. I think it's more like a quiet signal that many of us have forgotten how to hear. Maybe because life is noisy, maybe because we're stressed, maybe because we've spent years trusting everyone except ourselves. I don't know. But I do think that learning to listen to yourself is a skill worth developing. Not because it guarantees perfect decisions, not because it makes life easier, but because it helps you build a stronger relationship with the one person you'll spend your entire life with yourself. As always, take what resonates and leave the rest. These are simply observations, experiences, and ideas that I've found interesting along the way. If you'd like to support the channel, you can visit my Etsy shop. Your support helps me continue creating these videos and keeping this calm little corner of the internet going. And if you enjoy these conversations about spirituality, self discovery, intuition, and the deeper questions of life, I'd love to have you here. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.